So let's get started. So I think it's important when we're talking about bullying to define bullying and make sure that we have a clear understanding of what exactly it entails. One definition of bullying is that a student is being bullied or victimized when he or she is exposed repeatedly and over time to negative actions on the part of one or more students. So it's important to also distinguish, I think, the difference between this and just regular teasing, regular play between kids as they're maybe, just making fun of each other for a second or two. Bullying would be something that, like it says, is repeated and over time, and it includes a lot more negative actions. So that means that it entails aggressive behavior that can be in the form of physical contact with words or in more direct ways, such as making mean faces or gestures, spreading rumors, or intentionally excluding someone from a group. And these are just a couple of different examples of ways that kids bully others. But for the purposes of this webinar today, we're going to use this definition so that we make sure we're all on the same page. So bullying almost always includes an imbalance in strength as well. And this doesn't necessarily always have to be a difference in physical strength. It can be a difference in popularity, or it can be a difference in cognitive abilities. So somebody might be being bullied because they're not as popular, because they're smaller and weaker, and because maybe they're just not as intelligent as the other students perceive that they should be. So there's a difference in strength. It's more of a power struggle usually, and it's an exertion of power over one who's stronger in that particular area against another person. One of the other forms of bullying that it's important to be aware of is cyberbullying, because cyberbullying is very, very present now, and the difference between cyberbullying and bullying at school is that cyberbullying can happen 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. So cyberbullying can really reach a child who is being victimized at any point in time, no matter where they are. The other difference about cyberbullying is that it obviously, because cyber has to take place using electronic technology. So electronic technology can include devices and equipment such as cell phones, computers, and tablets, as well as communication tools, including social media sites, text messages, chat, and websites. So if your kids have their own cell phone, or if they have a computer or a tablet, or even if they have their own social media sites like Facebook pages or Twitter accounts or Instagram or something like that, if they text message, if they have text messaging plans, if they chat, if they have different websites that they go on, those are all the different points of contact that they can be accessed and that they will be exposed to cyberbullying through. So it looks like we just got the PowerPoint up and running, so sorry about that. Hopefully we're all on the same page again. Okay, so moving on. The next important thing to talk about is, why address bullying? Is it really that serious? Is it just something that's sensationalized in the news? Or is it something that we really definitely need to address? So bullying is a serious problem. So the answer to the question about whether or not it's an issue that needs to be addressed is definitely yes. It's been linked to teen and preteen suicide as well as school shootings. And when we say that, we're not wanting to freak anybody out and make you think that if there's bullying going on in your child's school that there will definitely be a school shooting. It's just that in the past, bullying has been linked to some of these incidents. So it's definitely an issue that we want to address. So research on bullying shows us that 15 to 25% of students are bullied with some frequency, and a reported 15 to 20% of U.S. students admit that they bully others. only 25 to 50% of children talk to an adult about being bullied, which is huge. I mean, that's definitely a number that we want to bring up, and it's definitely a number that in the first two cases with the 15 to 25% of students and the 15 to 20%, that we want to bring those numbers down. But most importantly, when we're talking today, we really want to talk about that the third statistic of the 25 to 50%, and we want to increase their tendencies to talk to an adult. So we're definitely going to talk about how we can do that as we move forward today. So there are some important things for you as foster parents to know when we talk about the risk factors, the things that can make a child more prone to being bullied. There are several characteristics that a victim of bullying might have. So they can be perceived as different from their peers, such as being overweight or underweight, wearing glasses or different clothing, being new to a school, or being unable to afford what kids consider cool. When we're talking about the kids that fall in this category, I mean, everybody knows kids and how they act at school and how they tease each other. So it seems like almost everybody could fall into a category of having different clothing or not being able to afford what kids consider cool or just being different from their peers. So it's not just strictly the being different that makes them a potential child for being at risk for being bullied. They also need to be perceived as being weak or unable to defend themselves, and that really speaks back to what we were talking about a minute ago when we're talking about the power struggle. There has to be one person who's perceived as being weak and then a child who perceives themselves as being stronger than the other in order for that child to be a victim. The kids can also be depressed, anxious, or have low self-esteem. And they can also be less popular than others and have few friends and do not get along well with others and are seen as annoying or provoking or antagonize others for attention. So these risk factors are true for all children, but I feel that when we're talking about foster children in particular, that foster kids are definitely at a higher risk than maybe other kids because they're going to experience almost all of these risk factors combined. When we talk about them, the very first thing we talked about is being perceived as different from their peers. One of the categories on that was being new to a school, which happens almost as soon as their child is removed from their home. So they were in a particular school when they were living at home with mom and dad, and regardless of how much they attended that school, it's possible that they, when they are put into your home, are going to be moved into a different school. So right away they're at risk because they're the new kid in school. So they're different and they're not the same as everybody who's grown up in that school and already has their little friend groups established. And then as far as being perceived as weak or unable to defend themselves and being depressed, anxious, and have low self-esteem, foster kids are almost always going to appear as being weak because they are just dealing with so much more than the average kid there. And for so long, they've probably been dealing with survival and trying to just make it through the day or make it to the next meal or make it through another encounter with somebody else who's exerting power over them, and so they're definitely going to be at a higher risk of being depressed and anxious and probably being less popular than others and have few friends, especially since they're going to be new to school. And then one of the most common things that we see with foster kids is the differing behaviors that they have, the different ways that they deal with the trauma that they've been through. So they can definitely be seen as being annoying or provoking. And in their mind, they're just trying to get the attention of others, and they're trying to make friends, and they're trying to just kind of make sense of the situation that they've been placed in, and the trauma of having been removed from their home. And so they might be thinking, I'm just going to make friends, but others might see it as really annoying and antagonizing, and that can put them at higher risk as well. So the most important thing to remember, though, is that just because a child is at risk does not mean that they are guaranteed to be bullied. So I really want to emphasize that as we're talking about things throughout this webinar today. It's not that everything that we say is a guarantee that such and such a consequence will happen. So lots of kids can have these risk factors and never be bullied, but it's just important for you to know that if your child does have these risk factors, it means it's possible that they will be bullied in the future. Okay, so let's move on past risk factors, and let's talk about the key players in bullying. So there are often more than 2 participants involved in bullying incidents, and I don't know that I remember when I was going to school ever seeing very much bullying. I know I was picked on for a short period in 6th grade, but I don't think I ever observed anything to the extent of kind of what's portrayed in the news these days. And so my understanding of bullying growing up was always just that there was one person. There was a bully and there was a victim. And everything that happened to the victim was strictly a result of just this one particular person who was bullying them. And there wasn't really anybody else involved. And then as I went through school and started learning more about how we kind of interact with others that are around us and how our actions influence others, and the things that we say and do are going to impact others even if we're not aware of it, it became easier for me to understand that there was more than just 2 participants involved in bullying incidents. So before we talk about that, Jennifer asked a question about, she says, in your opinion, would it be better or worse to go into a class the foster child will be transferring into and explain what foster care is and that the child coming in is in care before they come in? You know, I think, Jennifer, that it's really going to depend on what the behaviors of the child are going to be and the way that you think they're going to interact with their peers. We don't always want kids in foster care to kind of be labeled as, oh, this is a foster child, because the lack of education about foster care as a general rule just kind of can put them in a negative place from the get-go. And we wouldn't want a teacher to assume that any misbehavior on the child's part was a result of being in foster care. But if you, after putting them into school and they have a little bit of time, give them a little bit of time to adjust if there are some issues at that point, then I feel like it might be appropriate to come in and talk to the teacher and maybe see if the teacher would be okay with you talking about foster care or something like that. But I think it would just definitely depend on the behaviors and whether or not it was escalating and whether or not you felt like it was really appropriate, the best thing for the class to know about foster care. So, because definitely when we talk about negative aspects and a lack of education on foster care, if you were able to provide a positive aspect, then that would educate more people about foster care in general. So we definitely just work with the school on that. So if we move back to the PowerPoint and we're talking about the fact that there are usually more than 2 participants involved in bullying incidents, there's this group of researchers who did a lot of research on bullying in Norway, because long before bullying was studied in the United States, it was studied in European countries, and we were kind of a little late to the game as far as doing research on it. And what they found when they were studying bullying in Norway for this particular research project was that there was definitely more than 1 participant involved in every bullying incident. So, A on this diagram talks about the students who bully. So these are the students that want to bully, and they start the bullying and play the leader role. So they're usually the ones that we associate as with bullying. You know, if we're talking about our previous understanding of having been just a bully and a victim, the bully in our mind would fall under this A category. So they're going to be the primary aggressor and the one who leads the majority of the aggression in the case of the bullying incidents against the victim. So they also might have friends, the bully might have friends or acquaintances that fall under the category of B, which could be their followers or their henchmen. So these students are positive towards the bullying, so they definitely support it and they take an active part, but they don't usually initiate it and they do not play a lead role. So if we were going to talk about a particular instance and discerning the difference between the bully and a henchman, the difference would be if one, let's say there was a group of 3 boys in the school and they were picking on another boy. So one of the 3 boys would be the one that would shove the victim up against the locker, and so he will have been the initiator, he will have been A, the student who bullied, and then the other 2 might hold the other student against the locker. And so those 2 that are holding the victim against the locker would be considered the followers or the henchmen. So they didn't initiate it, and they're not necessarily the leader of the bullying group, but they are definitely participating in it, and they're actively participating, so they're physically getting their hands dirty by physically holding the other student against the locker in this one example. And they're positive about the bullying. They support the bullying. They definitely think it should go on for whatever reason. And so that's the role that the henchman would play in a situation like this. So there's also another group, which is C, the supporters or the passive bullies. So these students actively and openly support the bullying, for example, through laughter or calling attention to the situation, but they don't join in. So these students are the students that, if you've ever seen in a lot of high school, you know, movies about being in high school, when one kid starts a fight with another kid and they end up rolling around on the ground and they're in the fight, there's the group of students that are standing around them, and the ones that are cheering on or laughing, like it says, or calling attention to the situation would be considered the supporters or the passive bullies. And I think what's interesting about this term is the term passive bullies. I think it's important to note when we talk about later what you can do to kind of help your child understand bullying and the role that they play and how to change that role, that even standing in a circle and cheering on what's happening or calling attention to the situation is still a form of bullying. And I never would have thought that was the case in the past, but it definitely adds to the situation, especially when we're looking at it from the victim's point of view. Anybody who participates and isn't actively stepping in to stop it is going to be considered as being a part of the bullying as far as the victim is concerned. So C would be that category of students, like we said, that are encouraging it, but they're not joining in. They're not going to be throwing any punches or physically holding anybody up against the locker like we explained in the previous example. So there's also this group of the D group, which are passive supporters or possible bullies. These students like the bullying but do not show outward signs of support. So this group, I feel like, is kind of our, I don't know, they're the ones that if the camera panned around in the movie during the fight scene, that they would be standing there just kind of watching it and not really doing anything, not cheering and not calling attention to the situation, not throwing any punches. They're not the ones that started the fight, but they're there and they're just kind of standing there. And I think it's important to make a distinction with this group as well, that as far as the fact that they're just participating by standing there and watching it happen means that they're a passive supporter. So they're not actively supporting, kind of like the C group, but they're there and they're giving an audience to the act that's going on. So in that way, they're a passive supporter, and they could be a possible bully. Let's say at some point in the future, if they saw this same kid who was a victim get bullied again, and at this point they decided to cheer and call attention to the situation and kind of egg the bully and the henchman on, then they would shift into that group of C as passive bullies. So there's that potential for them to kind of go the other way, the negative direction, and become part of the C group. So then we also have, as part of our group here, the disengaged onlookers, and they're the E group. So these students do not get involved, and they do not take a stand, and they don't participate actively in either direction. So they might say things like, it's none of my business, or let's watch and see what happens. And I would say that the research that they did in Norway, based on the research they did, that the disengaged onlookers tend to be one of the larger groups. So usually it's the C and the E group that are the larger groups of participants. But these students just kind of stand there. They might even just walk away. They might not stand there and watch, because if they did, they would be considered passive supporters. So they're very disengaged from the situation, and they kind of just wash their hands of it and say, you know, it's not my business, it's not my place to get involved, this isn't my fight, I'm not going to participate, and they just kind of sit back and watch it happen from a distance. So this group, the next group that we want to talk about is F, the possible defenders. So these students dislike the bullying and think they should help the student who's being bullied but do nothing. So these are the kids, when the camera pans around in the teen movie during a fight, that have looks of horror on their faces, but they're not really doing anything. So you can tell by the looks on their face that they really don't support the bullying in any way, shape, or form. And they think they should help. They have a really strong feeling about somebody should jump in and somebody should do something, somebody should stop this, but they're not the ones that do anything. So this is definitely another group that participates in bullying situations. And then the final group would be the defenders. So these are students or classmates or peers that dislike the bullying and help or try to help the student who is being bullied. So this would be somebody who is on the opposite end of the spectrum from the followers or henchmen that are group B. The G defenders would step in and actively take a role because they dislike the bullying, and they would try to actually put a stop to it, either by saying something or getting the student who's being victimized to move away from the situation, or whatever they try to do to stop the bullying. G would be the opposite of the followers or the henchmen. And then, of course, there's H, the student in the middle, who's the student who's being bullied, and they're the victim. So when we look at this, there's definitely a system to bullying. It's more than just two players, and it's important to note that, because it's important to understand the dynamics of bullying situations if we really want to try and understand why they happen, like what are the underlying emotions behind this behavior. And then once we understand that, it makes us better capable of being able to move forward and help each and every person that's involved in each and every one of these groups, so that we can kind of disable the system. You know, we don't want this system to work in schools. So when we're talking about systems, just for a little bit of clarity, if we were to use a positive system as an example, everybody has a system in their home. So dad has a role, and mom has a role, and brother has a role, and sister has a role, and everybody has their own place in the home and the things that they're supposed to do, and everybody in the home works together to accomplish goals. And they can be really small goals, like getting out of the house on time in the morning, so everybody makes sure they take their certain amount of time in the bathroom, and everybody makes sure they eat their breakfast, and somebody prepared that breakfast, and so everybody works together as a system, kind of like a well-oiled machine, to accomplish goals, and they even work together as a system to accomplish bigger goals and to work through crises like deaths in the family and things like that. And family systems are systems that we definitely want to support. We want to encourage everybody to continue to play their role and continue to be a functioning member of that system so that the family as a whole continues to work together and can accomplish those goals and weather crises and things like that. So the difference between a family system that we want to have function because it's a very healthy system to be a part of when it's working right, and bullying is that bullying is definitely a negative system. It's not a system that we want to support. And so in order to kind of break the system or put a kink in the wheel of the bully system, we have to understand who all the players are. So it's important to understand that there is a bully, there are henchmen, there are passive bullies, passive supporters, disengaged onlookers, possible defenders, and defenders, and they all kind of center around the student who is bullied. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about the system of bullying and how we can kind of work against that system. So let's talk about the people who bully. And remember, we're including the first three categories. So the bully, the henchman, and the passive bullies, the ones who stand and cheer everything on. So boys bully more than girls do, and a relatively large percentage of girls, about 50%, report that they are bullied mainly by boys. So when I was doing research for this, that was news to me. I always just assumed that boys bullied boys and girls bullied girls. I really didn't think it was the other way around, that they would mix like that. But according to research, a large percentage of girls report that they are bullied mainly by boys. So that's an important characteristic to know of people who do bully. A somewhat higher percentage of boys are victims of bullying, especially in the junior high school grades. You know, and when we were talking earlier about the risk factors and how some of the risk factors apply to everybody, the risk factor of being different and wearing different clothes and not being able to afford what certain kids think is cool, that really almost applies to everybody in junior high, because junior high is right around the time where everybody starts going through puberty, and adolescents are cognitively trying to decide, you know, who they are and determine their identity and what that means. So they might try out several different types of clothing or hairstyles or makeup or whatever, and so that's going to all happen in junior high for the most part. So it's not really too shocking that a higher percentage of boys are victims of bullying, especially in junior high school grades. That's kind of where we would anticipate most of it to take place anyway. Well, that's not to say that it always only takes place in junior high. There's definitely bullying in high school and grade schools as well. Physical bullying is less common among girls, who typically use more subtle and indirect means of harassment, such as intentionally excluding someone from a group, spreading rumors, and manipulating friendship relations. So the example we were talking about earlier with a bully and his henchman pushing another student up against a locker, I would say is more typical of a boy using physical bullying, and girls would be something along the lines of writing notes and passing notes or text messaging in order to spread a rumor about a particular girl or even a boy, and trying to make them become a social outcast. And so there are differences between how boys bully for the most part and how girls bully for the most part. Girls are definitely, because they are intentionally excluding someone from a group, spreading rumors, and manipulating friendships, relations, they definitely take advantage of cyberbullying. So we see a lot of this played out in cyberbullying as far as how girls, the means that they use to bully. So when we're moving on and we're talking about, you know, that's kind of who bullies who and how they do it is what we were talking about previously. We want to talk about now the characteristics of a bully. So because that's kind of always been something that I've wondered, and I'm sure that there are other foster parents and just parents in general that wonder why a kid bullies. And a lot of times we've always thought that maybe, you know, they're bullied at home or whatever. We come up with a lot of different scenarios that could explain why they do what they do, or they're spoiled kids or something like that. So I thought it was really interesting to see what the research said about it. So what research tells us is that some bullies are well connected to their peers, and they have social power, and they're overly concerned about their popularity and like to dominate or be in charge of others. And that would definitely make sense, and would definitely speak to what we mentioned earlier when we were saying that bullying is not always about having a physical power over another person. It can be a popularity thing. It can be that you're in a higher social group at school, and so therefore if you're in that social group and you're well connected to the peers in that group, and you're overly concerned about your popularity and maintaining your status in the group, then you would want to exert your power over others because you would believe that that would help you maintain your status in the group and help you dominate. Another group of bullies are some that are more isolated from their peers, and they may be depressed or anxious, have low self-esteem, be less involved in school, be easily pressured by peers, or not identify with the emotions or feelings of others. And I think it's important to note when we're talking about this second group that some of the risk factors that we mentioned earlier that a child could have that could make them a potential victim are also listed here as far as characteristics of a bully. So it's possible that a child who has depression and they're anxious and they have low self-esteem can become a victim because and in addition they're isolated from their peers, or they can become a bully. So it's not necessarily a guarantee either way, but there are possibilities that they could become one or the other. It's not just that they will become a victim if they have these characteristics. And then we're definitely going to focus on the fact that they don't identify with the emotions or feelings of others as we talk later about what you can do. But some of the traits that you might see as far as behaviors that a bully might exhibit, so if your child is a bully, would be they're aggressive and they're easily frustrated. If they have less parental involvement or they're having issues at home. So this is definitely going to be something that's going to be the case for almost all of our kids that are in care. So we don't necessarily need to focus on this one as being either one or the other. Either a foster kid has this or a biological kid has this. It's just important to note that this trait, in case one of your biological children has this, because obviously foster kids will have issues at home and have less parental involvement. They will think badly of others. They'll have difficulty following rules. They'll view violence in a positive way. Now, this is also a trait that we could see a lot of our foster kids having. It's just a possibility that they might view violence in a positive way, because it's possible that if they come from an abusive home, that they will have seen violence as a way to deal with problems and issues that they have in any part of their lives, and so they'll feel like violence is a positive way to handle problems. Now, that's not necessarily going to be the case for every foster kid. Lots of kids, even biological children, could view violence in a negative way, but when we're talking about the characteristics of a bully, they'll view violence in a positive way, as a positive tool to solve problems. And they'll usually have friends who bully others. So they're definitely going to have peers that feel the same way as they do. So they're isolated from their peers, but they're still, the peers that they do have are going to also bully as well. So now that we know kind of how bullies become bullies, or kind of what traits actually that a bully can have, it's important to be able to identify those traits, and it's also important to be able to identify, on the other hand, whether or not the child that's in your home is being bullied, because there's a lot of there's a lot of shame involved in bullying, and we talk about shame a lot in free service and a lot of our in-service classes here at Utah Foster Care Foundation, and how damaging it can be. And so we know that if a child who's being bullied and therefore is going to be being singled out from their peers and made to be a social outcast and intentionally excluded from the group, they're probably going to feel a lot of shame about what's going on with them. And it's important for us as foster parents and caregivers to be very alert and be on top of paying attention to the signs that could show that our child is being bullied, because they might not come right out and say something. And that really speaks to what we talked about earlier, in that only 25 to 50% of kids who are bullied actually report to an adult. So you want to pay attention to these signs. There could be unexplained injuries, lost or destroyed items or clothing, changes in eating habits, such as coming home from school hungry, frequent aches and pains. They could have sleep issues or disturbances in sleep, such as nightmares. They could have declining grades, a loss of friends, a decreased sense of self-esteem, and they could have some symptoms of self-destructive behavior, including suicidal thoughts, self-harm, and running away. So again, when we're talking about this, it's important to note that a lot of the kids that are in care have these symptoms to begin with, and they exhibit these symptoms as a way of dealing with trauma and emotion. And it's going to be up to us as parents and caregivers to, like we said, really be advocates for the kid and pay attention to them and their behaviors, so that we know the difference between what's a behavior as a result of trauma and what's a behavior as a result of being bullied. So for example, unexplained injuries shouldn't be happening to a child, even a child who's in care. So that would definitely be something we would know for sure would be a sign of being bullied. Lost or destroyed items or clothing, as long as those items were lost or destroyed when they went, when they're coming home from school, and not necessarily if they lost their coat while they were doing visitation with their birth parents, then we could definitely attribute a lost coat or a destroyed something as a symptom of being bullied, a sign that they're being bullied. So changing in eating habits, such as coming home from school hungry, could be an indication that they're having some issues around lunchtime or things like that, that their money's maybe being taken from them while they're at school. And frequent aches and pains, sleep issues or disturbances in sleep, such as nightmares. Would be up to us as parents to make sure that we were talking through nightmares and making them feel comfortable and safe and secure, but also trying to figure out kind of what the nightmare is about, and hoping that that can help us determine whether or not bullying is going on, or it's just, fear of abandonment or something that has to relate to them having been removed from their home. So again, as you go down this entire list, you just want to be really careful that you're discerning the difference between what's being exhibited as a symptom of trauma and what's being exhibited as a sign of being bullied. Not that being bullied is not traumatic, but we just want to make sure that we're discerning between the two. So as we move on, we want to also, like I said before, let's be redundant, right? It's important to say something more than once. So kids might exhibit some of the signs of bullying for other reasons. Maybe they've had a visit with their birth family, so they're coming back, and we know that they can sometimes have eating and sleeping issues and things like that when they come back. They might just be processing the trauma of having been removed from their home, and they might be processing the abuse and neglect that brought them into care. So I think we've said enough about that twice. So we'll just go ahead and move on. Let's talk about the bystanders. So we've talked about these are the characteristics of the bullies, which would be the first groups, A, B, and C, the bullies, the henchmen, and the passive supporters. But we've also got those groups of bystanders who are kind of the ones that either do stand there and participate by not saying anything at all, or the ones who kind of disengage. So these kids may feel as though they share some of the traits of the victim, and as such, they're reluctant to get involved. And that's going to be important as we move on and talk about what you can do as a caregiver. It's important to know why they're not stepping forward, and it could just be because they fear it. They're afraid that they're very similar in personality and trait or physical build or popularity level or cognitive abilities to the victim, and so they're reluctant to get involved because then that would mean they would become a victim as well. And secondly, they can also feel helpless and not know specific ways to stop the bullying. So a lot of times it's possible that a student or a peer might hesitate to step in for fear of being physically harmed themselves, if that's the type of bullying that they're trying to stop. So we want to help the bystanders to understand that there are other specific ways to stop bullying in addition to kind of stepping in and stopping physical abuse. So let's talk about what you can do. The most important thing that you can do in your home is talk about bullying. We can't stress enough that you talk about bullying. We have to have it be much like we talk about how if you adopt a child, you need to tell them their adoption story from the very beginning so that it's a very comfortable topic in your home and it's something that can be talked about at any point in time. We really want bullying to be that as well, if it's something that you are working through in your family. And even if it's not something you're working through in your family, it's important to talk about it just so that there's an education level in your home. So, things to talk about. We want to encourage the kids to speak to a trusted adult if they are bullied or see others being bullied. The adult can give comfort, support, and advice even if they can't solve the problem directly. And we want to also encourage the child to report bullying if it happens. This is really key, as we've said 2 or 3 times already. We've only got maybe up to 50% of kids actually reporting bullying to a trusted adult. We want that number to be much, much higher. We ideally want it to be 100%, but the closer that we can get to that number, the better. We want adults to know about it because they can't actually do anything. We can't do anything as caregivers, and adults at school can't do anything about where the bullying's going on if nobody says anything. So we want them to speak to a trusted adult and encourage them to report bullying if it happens. So that's one of the things that we want to talk with them about. One of the other things we want to talk with them about is how to stand up to kids who bully. So you can give tips like using humor or saying stop directly and confidently and talking about what to do if those actions don't work, like walking away. A lot of the times what research tells us is that if everybody is standing around and cheering the bully on and encouraging the act, they'll just continue to do it because they know they have the support of their peers. They don't anticipate somebody coming in and saying the word stop to them, saying stop right now. This is not okay. Leave him alone or leave her alone. So that can definitely be a really useful tip. And then talking about what to do if those actions don't work, like walking away, is also really important. And that ties back into, I think, the first bullet as well, when we're talking about reporting to an adult. So if they're going to walk away, talking about where they're going to walk away to can be that trusted adult like they've already identified. So we also want to talk to them about strategies for staying safe, such as staying near adults or other groups of friends, other kids. So there can be safety in numbers when we're talking about bullying. Sometimes a bully and his henchmen will wait until the child that they want to perpetrate on, the victim, is by themselves or is not surrounded by very many people. So if we can talk to our kids about staying near adults, staying in larger groups of kids and things like that, just to kind of stay in a safer environment, the hope is that if they place themselves in situations like that, that the bullies will have less access to them. We also want to urge them to help kids who are bullied by showing kindness or getting help. So when we talk about this, this can be another tip to talk about how to stand up to kids who bully. And it's not necessarily physically standing up and stepping in and saying something. It could be that after the event is over, after the bullying event is over, your kid is the one that steps in and shows kindness and maybe helps take them to the nurse's office so they can, you know, be taken care of or something like that, and befriends that kid who was being victimized. Because if one of the risk factors of being a victim is not having very many friends and kind of being socially outcast, if we can teach our kids to instead befriend the kids who are victims, that's one of the best ways that they can stand up to a bully, is by making them a friend and including them. There's also the option to watch short webisodes and discuss them with kids. So there are a lot of videos on YouTube that are about bullying and talk about the effects that it has on kids and talk about the effects that it has on schools and communities and things like that. There are also a couple of different movies that have been made about bullying, and so watching those with your kids and then having that discussion afterwards about how they felt about it and whether or not they feel like it was okay for the bullies to pick on the kids or something like that really gets them to talk about their emotions, and also gives you an opportunity to gain some insight about how they really feel about bullying, how they perceive it, and how they see it. So some of the other things that you can do is making sure you keep the lines of communication open by asking questions. So much in the similar way that I was talking about adoption and how we want adoption to be an ongoing topic in your home and something that's safe, and we want bullying to be like that as well. We want it to be a constant topic of conversation. So we don't just want it to be a one-time conversation that's only held, you know, in a very formal setting and, okay, we talked about it, now we can check it off our list and move on. We want the lines of communication to be open. So, you know, you can ask questions like asking them to describe what kids who bully are like and why they think people bully. Ask them who the adults are that they trust the most when it comes to things like bullying. You can also ask them if they've ever felt scared to go to school because they were afraid of bullying, and what ways have they tried to change the bullying themselves. So these are kind of some really excellent open-ended questions that invite more than a yes or no answer and really can start a good conversation in your home about bullying. In addition, you can use these questions after you watch a webisode as well. So some of the additional questions you can ask is whether or not they have friends that left other kids out on purpose. So this would be more of the relational bullying that we were talking about that's more popular among girls as far as intentionally excluding someone from a group, and asking them whether or not they viewed that as bullying and why or why not. You can also ask them what they usually do when they see bullying going on. This is going to be a really good indicator for you to know which group your child fits in that bullying system. Ask them if they ever see kids at their school being bullied by other kids and how it makes them feel. And ask them if they've ever tried to help someone who's being bullied, what happened when they stepped in or afterwards when they approached the child that was victimized, and what they would do if it happens again. It helps them to put a plan into effect, which is some of the tips that we were talking about earlier. So there's more that you can do as well. You can also find out if the school that they attend has an anti-bullying program. A lot of schools now do have some anti-bullying programs in place, or they're thinking of getting some in place, or they're just getting off the ground, and asking them if they have one could encourage them to put one into place if they don't already have one into place. So being in contact with the school is very important. And then on the same hand, if you're able to help out, offer to help out in any way that you're able to help, maybe help get the program off the ground or something like that, if they need some volunteers. Another thing that you can do is make sure you take your child's complaints seriously. So if your child approaches you and lets you know that they're a victim of bullying, or if you discover that while you're asking them some of the questions that we talked about earlier, please be sure to take your child's complaints seriously. Because we've talked about before, I know in other classes that we've had here at the Foundation, it's all about perception. So even though you might not perceive what happened to your child as being something that is a bullying act, an act of bullying, or something that they should be reacting to, it's very real to them. And so if they feel that they're threatened, or they feel like they're being bullied, they feel like what's going on is inappropriate, then that's the reality of the situation. And we need to make sure that we take that seriously. So again, we want to encourage them to report the bullying. And an important side note to this is don't talk to the bully yourself. Do not, as a parent, approach the bully, which is really difficult for us to do. But we often talk about not throwing an adult temper tantrum. And we love these kids. We love our kids, and we want to be their advocates. And we ask you, when you take these kids into your home, to treat them like they're your own kids. And that means you now have a new cub to mama bear. And so it's really hard to not want to go to the school and just, tell that little kid off because he hurt your kid. So don't throw an adult temper tantrum. Don't talk to the bully yourself. Contact the school. And then encourage your kids also not to give bullying an audience. Encourage them to not be the one that stands around and cheers it on and anything, just to not pay attention to it. In other words, not giving it an audience. So not ignore it, but just make it so it's not always this great event that everybody feels like they have to attend. Okay. So those are some of the things that you can do at home, as far as if your child reports to you, if you notice that they have the characteristics of a bully, or if they report to you that they are a victim, or you can tell based on their answers to questions that they're some of those bystanders. But there are also some things that you can do if you personally witness the bullying. So there are some things that we don't want you to do if you witness bullying. Don't ignore it. So don't just think that kids can work it out without adult help. That's not true. And we don't want to leave the kids feeling unsupported. And when we're talking about the kids, we're mostly talking about the victim. We don't want the victim to feel like, oh, you can just handle it and it's okay, you're just a kid, you'll bounce back from it, because they definitely feel helpless as a victim. So don't ignore it. Don't immediately try to sort out the facts. So don't try and stand there with the kids and try and get them to tell you what happened. And in addition to that, don't force other kids to say publicly what they saw. We just don't want to make it this huge event that makes the situation much bigger than it already is. So don't question the children involved in front of other kids. Don't talk to the kids that are involved together, and talk to them only separately. And if you are a school administrator, this is definitely how you want to do it when you have the conversations, making sure you have them separately. If you're a parent and you observe this type of behavior at some type of a gathering or something with kids, then you would want to make sure that you contacted the child's parent, and that you guys maybe had a conversation about what happened together as parents, and then each of you talk to your kids separately. And then don't make the kids involved apologize or patch up relations on the spot. So when we talk about in classes not engaging in a situation and not bringing additional emotion into it, because all that does is escalate the situation, don't make the kids then engage in something when their emotions are high as well. So give them some time to process what's happened and talk to them about it before moving on, and then maybe then encouraging them to patch up relations with the kid. So if your child is a bully, make sure your child knows what the problem behavior is. Young people who bully must learn that their behavior is wrong and harms others. This is important and ties directly back to what I said we were going to mention later when we talked about how bullies might not necessarily be able to relate to the feelings that their victims are experiencing. So it can't relate to the emotions that this kid who's being victimized is experiencing. So it's important to let them know what their problem behavior is and that they understand that their behavior is wrong and that it does harm others. It does have consequences and people are affected by it. We also want to make sure that you show kids that bullying is taken seriously. So we want a bully to know that bullying will not be tolerated. And just, again, making sure that when we're having these conversations with kids, that we are modeling respectful behavior when we're addressing the problem. If you're yelling and screaming at a kid who's just been caught bullying another kid, and you're trying to tell them that bullying is definitely taken serious and this is not going to be tolerated, and while you're doing it, you're yelling, you're just reinforcing what they were just participating in, because they were probably just yelling and screaming at another kid. And so we want to calmly talk to them and tell them the behavior won't be tolerated and model respectful behavior. Okay, so if your child is a bully, we also want to use consequences to teach them. Consequences that involve learning or building empathy, like we mentioned before, can help prevent future bullying. Work with the child to understand some of the reasons he or she bullied. For example, sometimes children bully to fit in, so these kids can benefit from participating in positive activities. Involvement in sports and clubs can enable them to take leadership roles and make friends without feeling the need to bully. So for any of you who have ever seen the movie Mean Girls, the main bully in that female group of bullies, she ended up participating in lacrosse. And it was a great way for her to be a leadership and get out some of her anger and her aggression by participating in a physical activity. And she was also able to fit in with a group that had a much healthier dynamic and a much healthier system. Other times kids act out because something else, like issues at home, abuse, or stress is going on in their lives, so they also may have been bullied. And these kids may be in need of additional support, such as mental health services. And we would want to make sure that definitely for kids in care, we take advantage of the mental health services that are available to them and get them help if they need it. So that's all that we have ready for you today on bullying. So the takeaways that we definitely want you to take away are that bullying is definitely a problem, and it's definitely something that we should address. There's always more than one key player in a bullying situation. So by talking to your kids and observing their behavior, you can hopefully understand what role they play in bullying, and then use some of the tips that we mentioned to get them to change their role. And if they're the defender, we don't want them to change their role. Maybe they can encourage others to become a defender as well. Now, if you want to get credit for watching this webinar, you need to make sure to email your trainer and let them know at least 3 things that you learned from the webinar, and then we'll make sure that you get 1 hour of credit. And be sure to check the Foster roster. In the future, we'll be having more webinars every month, and they're going to be advertised in our Foster roster. They're also going to be advertised on your Facebook cluster pages. And you can go to utahfostercare.org and click on our webinar section to find out information about when the next webinar is going to be held, and you can access archived webinars as well. So thanks for attending, everybody.